I've made over 300 of these tables and typically make 25 at a time. This video was shot fairly early on in the process, which has changed over the years. I use Titebond flow set glue, which leaves a very rigid glue line so one doesn't get much spring back. Glue has to be applied very quickly with a roller. I apply it to both surfaces to make sure there's no dry spots, as the gluing process is not very quick. There are holes in the veneer and 2 pins sticking out of the gluing jig that are used to align the veneers as they stack up. Once all the layers are glued, a 3/8" cover sheet is placed over it, and screws are slipped through the holes and then screwed into the threaded inserts in the gluing jig. Straps are put around the veneers to pull them tightly to the form. This is important as it keeps the vacuum bag from sucking up underneath the veneers. I put a layer of plastic and a layer of a vacuum net breather mesh, then the bag. The bag has a waterbed fitting on it, so a shop vac can be hooked up and suck the bulk of the air out very quickly. Then the vacuum pump pulls the final pressure. We use an electric blanket to dry the glue more quickly. The next step is the bases, which are made from 8 layers of 1/8" bending ply plus veneer. Two bases are glued up at the same time on one jig, and they're held in place with stretch wrap wrapped very tightly with the aid of a custom clamping device. This foot pedal allows me to pull the veneers down tightly to the mold and then get stretch wrap around it, which keeps it from sliding around in the vacuum press. Here I'm removing the bent lamination from the cylindrical mold. Here I am removing the bases from the vacuum bag and taking them off the mold. At this point, I let the laminations dry for 5 days or more. The bases are cut on the bandsaw with various jigs. Here I'm cutting the base with a circle cutting jig and the table tilted at an angle. I use a Lennox TriMaster carbide blade, which will cut perfectly and not chip out the veneer on the underside. There is a curved chute attached to the bandsaw at the correct angle. The first cut is made freehand, following a line that's been drawn on the veneer before the piece is laminated. The remainder of the cuts are made with a power feeder with an extended feeder wheel and a fence on the chute to control the width. I developed the extended wheel on the power feeder when I was having to work by myself, but it works beautifully with 2 people. This is a spacer that goes between the individual arms. The first step is to cut a radius on the shaper. Then, using the correct angles, I cut them to length and then cut the ends. A hole is drilled through the spacers, and then there's a curved cut on the bandsaw held in place with a vacuum jig. The bottom wood spacer is made on 2 different circle cutting jigs on the bandsaw and a couple of different jigs on the sliding table saw. I now make it in a similar way using a much smaller piece of wood. Holes are drilled through the arms on a fixture on the drill press. Have to remember not to drill through the top one. Here, the bottom spacer is being attached to the base. It centers itself precisely. In the initial assembly, arm number 4 is screwed to arm number 5, and then the whole assembly is bolted together. The bolt is sandwiched between the first 2 layers. Every piece is labeled individually, then the links are marked and it's cut, but they have to all go back exactly the same because each table has slight variations. I use a very sophisticated jig to mark the tops of all the pieces for where they should be cut. In this video, I'm using blue tape on the underside of the wood to prevent chip out. With a higher quality blade, you don't need that. After all the parts are cut out, the edges are sanded, then they are painted with an iridescent copper paint, and then all the faces are sanded. Each individual part is then finished with conversion varnish, and then everything is reassembled. There are a lot of interesting techniques in this project, and I would hope that people watching could take some of them and apply them to their own projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.